John the Legend. Welcome to Mic'd Up with Audiosure.
Yeah, this is my first one with you, actually.
Thank you so much for joining, and this is our second episode. We want to talk about sound, speakers, your experience in the industry, and about you, and just the advice that you can give to guys out there that's listening to the podcast. So, what first sparked your passion for professional audio?
This is a good question. I haven't actually really got this question before, and I think it is actually nice to be able to share a little bit of my story. So, what really got me into this is, it must have been probably 2007. There was a big live music festival called My Coke Fest. I don't know if anyone knew it. Maybe some of you guys knew it, but it was one of my favorites, man. I think it was Evanescence and Three Doors Down and Uberstank, and it was just an incredible experience for me. It was my first time really experiencing what a sound system can do on a large scale like that. It was my first goosebump feeling. And I think that just kind of set me off on this trajectory of trying to understand more of that environment. And I had a friend who was actually largely into filming things and stuff, and he actually went through to the Academy of Sound Engineering, and he was doing a lot of film stuff there. And he said, well, why don't you come through and check it out? Maybe it's something that clicks with you. So I think the biggest thing for me was that concert, that goosebump feeling, and actually just really experiencing the atmosphere of an event like that. And that's what got me started into the live audio game.
So you said Uberstank, Evanescence,
Three Doors Down.
Who was your favorite?
Well, Evanescence was the headliner that year, and she even did a bit of a collab with Stained. And so for me, that was like a really cool moment where it was just kind of seeing all of the live performances and stuff. And actually we decided to leave that event slightly earlier, just to try and avoid some of the cars and everybody trying to get out of the venue. And at the time, it was in Alberton, and I remember that my parents' house, the roof actually overlooked sort of the event grounds. And so I was kind of a little bit upset that I couldn't get to see the end of the set, and then climbed up on the roof, sat there near midnight or whatever it was, and you could actually see all of the lights and the smoke, and you could actually kind of hear a little bit of the audio. I mean, we must have been a couple kilometers away, and it just showed you like the sheer size and energy surrounding these sorts of events.
Yeah. So tell me, I mean, you've now gone into the audio sphere, the bug bit you. How did that lead to you becoming the Martin, working for the Martin Audio division?
So how that came about was I actually started, as I mentioned earlier, at the Academy of Sound Engineering. I actually studied a diploma in live sound engineering, and obviously part of the curriculum was to be exposed to a lot of live events. And so that's kind of where my background started. And then from there, they had introduced a fully accredited Bachelor's of Science degree in sound engineering / design, which really kind of sat home with me. I mean, it was just a decision that I made to kind of further my studies and focus maybe a little bit less on the hands-on approach stuff, and rather give me another opportunity in the design side of stuff. I felt that, at that time you might want to be moving forward with a family, and live events can be quite strenuous, and you're traveling a lot, you're out late hours. So I thought, let me have something else, a completely different qualification that allows me different opportunities. And I built such good relationships with everybody there that they had asked me to stay on and help them design a lot of their studios, and also do a lot of lecturing. So I kind of got involved in the lecturing there and building of studios, and that was a really cool phase in my life for, I think it was about 5 or 6 years. And then I actually had a friend who was actually working at Audiosure, and a position had come available, and he said, well, why don't you come through for an interview? And at the time I was quite comfortable. I was really happy, but I had moved to Centurion, so it was quite a long drive for me, and it just seemed a little bit more convenient. So I thought, let me come through and see what it's all about. And I met with Greg, and Greg obviously asked me all the questions, and that's kind of where it started. That was where my journey with Audiosure began, and that was now actually just over 7 years ago.
So, for someone hearing the name Martin Audio for the first time, like, where does that sit in the industry in terms of sound?
Yes. Well, listen, if you are in the live sound game, if you haven't heard of Martin Audio, then I think you have been living under a little bit of a rock, if I'm honest. A lot of the time, big PA brands, we always just associate with the brands that we're familiar with in South Africa.
Absolutely.
And at the time, I knew of Martin Audio very well. Glastonbury Festival, everybody knows about it. Huge European setups. I think everybody who had heard of the name Martin Audio, maybe there was a bit of a misconception that they think that it's just kind of out of reach, too expensive, too premium, Ministry of Sound clubbing, that type of stuff. And meanwhile, that's just like a wrong, so it is a misconception because it is actually really well positioned within the market from a pricing point of view, considering what you're getting. I mean, they've been around since 1971.
Oh, wow.
Over 55, actually. I think this year would be, 56 years now, I think, almost. And, it's a big name in the industry, touring with all of those big, great rock bands. So, I think we've come a long way. If I'm talking from an Audiosure point of view, we invested in a lot of skill going back 7 years ago and invested in a team that's capable of promoting a product of this caliber. And it's been a fantastic journey for us where we've now been able to expose the more of the South African market to a brand that's always been there. It's not like it's new and up and coming. It's a brand that's been around for ages. It's just hasn't had the spotlight on it that it should have had in our market.
Absolutely. So power of marketing in the South African region is really what was lacking. But they have the pedigree, they have the experience and the heritage.
They do.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely.
So in your opinion, what separates good or average audio from really professional audio?
Sure.
Well, or sound systems, specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, a little bit more my background. The reason I also love audio is my granddad was in premium hi-fi stuff, which is also one of the reasons that I was involved in it. But he had a book that he shared with me, which was about field small parameters and enclosure designs and how speaker drivers interact with the enclosure that they're in and how that promotes sound quality. You can have a great driver, but if you put it into a box that it wasn't designed for, it actually isn't going to give you a good result. And so I think with technology nowadays and computer modeling, it's been a lot easier to minimize the maths associated to those calculations and then use software to your advantage to predict what boxes will sound like. And nowadays, drivers are way more efficient. You're getting much better quality out of those speakers. And I think the point I'm trying to get to is it's quite easy to create a really good sounding box nowadays. And what really sets it aside is the ability to now take a box which on its own sounds quite good and be able to optimize it with software that can predict things. And I think this is where the biggest change in the audio game has come. Amplifiers have become more efficient. They've become much cleaner sounding. So being able to have a DSP and modeling software that allows you to then take an already well-made good box and apply it with modeling software to just predict what that box is going to do throughout a venue space is just what's changed the game. Previously when you would go to events many years ago, you would actually have to choose very specifically where you would want to sit so that you know that you're going to get a good experience. Hence all of the terms with like golden circle, sitting in front of house, and listen, to a certain degree that's still true. But what the modeling and predictive software allows us to do nowadays with these good quality boxes is give the audience a much better experience from left to right, from front to back, so that everybody in that space who's paying for a ticket is getting a really good result.
So, I mean, John, you going to a stadium, it's set up, Martin Audio's rigged, there are delays, the sound guys are on point. Where are you sitting, bro? Where are you sitting? VIP, back of the room, where are you sitting?
I mean, listen, ideally, if you can afford it nowadays with concert pricing, I would do golden circle, but right at the back fence, just in front of house. I think that's a really good spot to be, simply because that's where the engineers are mixing from. So
interesting.
So you're closest to the ears that are responsible for what the event sounds like. And I think that's a good area to be in. because you're close enough that you are able to see what's happening on stage. You are far enough away where you're getting the summation of all the audio arriving at you, a nice balance between the low frequencies at the subs in the front, along with the HF and mids that are coming through. Not that a lot of these events are run in stereo, so you're not like you're going to get a stereo image on some of these events, but it just gives you a good overall experience. That's how it would be.
Yeah. And I mean, just a question for me personally, when you stand in front of a sub, does that not defeat the purpose? Doesn't a sub need a bit of space for it to really form correctly?
Yep.
And what's the distance from the sub to where you should stand optimally?
Yes.
And I know it's probably different across different ranges.
Yeah, I mean, we can get really deep here. But yeah, again, if you want to stand quite close to a subwoofer, you're going to get a lot of energy, and some people like that because you get a lot of low frequency experience. But you are right, low frequencies, namely 80 hertz and lower, have much longer waveforms. So they do take a longer distance to form properly. So you do want to be some distance away from that subwoofer, especially if you're wanting to achieve a decent blend.
Okay.
So you can kind of imagine that if you are in the front of house position, there's going to be the best balance between everything, the way that the engineer wants it to be. And then as you move closer to the stage, you're actually going to be starting to increase the low frequency energy because you're getting closer to the subs. So you can kind of actually fine tune where you want to be on that slider relative to your sound tastes.
So how has live sound technology changed over the last 10 years? I know from my studio background, when we measure a room, we get specific microphones, shoot out white noise, read the room space, and obviously that is enclosed, but obviously when you're in your stadium, how has technology, formed or changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah, so I think over the last 10 years, people have really learned to understand how multiple speakers in the same environment interact with each other. And that can be positive or negative, and you just need to understand where that line is. And so what it allows us to do nowadays is there's actually two parts to this. Let's just take Martin Audio as an example with their wavefront precision line array systems. Where you have multiple boxes hanging in a line array that you're all asking to work together as one unit, And what it allows you to do is, from Martin Audio's perspective, they will give you what they use is called display. And display will allow you to calculate the size of the venue, the distance that you're wanting to achieve. You can have a reference SPL level that you're wanting to target. You can also choose how much drop-off you want. Are you happy to accept a 3 dB drop-off from front to back? Are you trying to get it better than that? That's where the predictive software is really great when it comes to the designing phase, where we can then make sure that we have an appropriate PA system to cover that space. But then, especially for indoor events, and I actually think it's good to go there, there's a lot of technology that allows you to then take that optimization file and make it even better. Because we, as an example, will often use Smart. Smart's a piece of software with measurement microphones, which we could position through different spaces in the audience area, which would then allow us to not only take into account the direct sound coming from the PA, but how those reflections will then bounce back to the listener and how that will affect things. So, for example, different room sizes, you get different standing waves, frequencies that are promoted that you don't want to be promoted. It will allow us to remove those. And the predictive software from Martin Audio's point of view doesn't know what your wall is made out of, or doesn't know the reflection properties of that wall, which is why we have to actually do a real life in-venue measurement.
Okay. So what are the biggest mistakes that production companies make when setting up, when getting ready for a massive venue, setting up sound and getting ready to accept the crowd?
Absolutely. I think the biggest mistake that we've always seen with this is that sometimes there's only so much a speaker can do, no matter how good that speaker is, the brand of that speaker, there's only so much it can do. And so a lot of the time we see speakers just being deployed in the wrong manner, in the sense that if you're taking on a really large venue, we've seen way too little speakers being used. It's just not possible for the sound system to appropriately cover that area. So the sound system just ends up working so hard to try and achieve that reference level throughout the space that I think that's probably the biggest mistake that people use is regardless of which top brand you're using, it's the same principle applies. You need to have an appropriately sized sound system to cover that space.
So now I want to throw something in the water there.
Cool.
Is bigger always better?
Oh, no. Well, we could joke about this, right? But no, bigger is not always better. And actually nowadays with technology, we're able to really make compact systems perform like much bigger speakers. So line array was a great invention if you think about it. And especially if I tie this back to our brands, Martin Audio and their wavefront precision. Take the WPC as an example, the wavefront precision compact. You've got 8 drivers inside of that speaker. So even though it's a compact size, you're actually getting the performance associated to a much bigger box. So yeah, no, bigger is not always better. And also, I'll give you a perfect example. Let's say we're designing a venue sound system where we need to take into account the main audience area, but then we have an under balcony and an over balcony or above balcony. And the thing is, you don't want a massive speaker underneath the balcony. Otherwise, everyone sitting in that row is not going to be able to see what's happening on stage. And so there you want very small, discrete sound speakers where what we call delay speakers, where you don't even want to notice them. You don't even want to know that they're on. You want to time align them properly, let them be so small, let them cover the HF drop-off that you get naturally throughout the space, and just make it feel like your perspective is still on stage. And so there is an example where small is actually better.
Okay, that's brilliant. So you now have this amazing Martin line array rig. You have everything. You have an amazing sound desk from Allen and Heath. How important is sound optimization and acoustic treatment when you are in a building with 4 walls?
Yes. So that's a very great question. And again, they play equally important roles. So for example, the first point would be to start with a really good sound system that's designed for that. So a lot of the problems that we see there is sometimes someone will go for what we call a point source speaker, and it's a powerful point source speaker, but it's at the front of the venue. And we obviously have a lot of distance from the front row all the way to the back row. And so sound naturally drops off over distance. So this is actually a good example of where we would use line array boxes, where we could then split up the responsibility of the array so that each box can then have a dedicated function. So the top box would be responsible for covering the back row of audience members, and likewise the bottom box on that line array will be responsible for covering the front row. Now, obviously, they're going to be at very different levels because you're much closer in the front row to the bottom speaker than you are in the back row to the top speaker.
Correct.
So what we need to be able to do then is do what we call a low box resolution with Martin Audio, where let's say we've got 8 elements in that array. Each element in that array is controlled by a different amp channel, which allows us to be able to shade that array beautifully so that the top box works the hardest, it's the brightest, the bottom box works the least hard, and it's the warmest.
So it's closest.
The closest. And then the natural result is that when you're standing in the front of the venue, the middle in the venue, or the back of the venue, your SPL and EQ are going to be very similar.
Okay.
And that's where the PA can play its role. But the second part to your question, which is just as equally important, and I think unfortunately in South Africa it's a lot of the time just disregarded, is that again your PA can only do so much. It doesn't matter the quality of that PA, it still can only do so much. So yes, a better quality PA will do better than a low quality PA. But again, if you've got a big flat, hard surface at the back of your venue, you're going to get hard slapback. It's going to come straight back at the person presenting. And that's just going to throw unwanted frequencies around the room. And that really messes up what we call speech intelligibility. And that's the audience's ability to interpret what's being said without straining. And so a lot of the time there's this misconception that when people think that they can't hear something, they turn the level louder, which actually just makes it more uncomfortable for people in the venue because it doesn't need to be that loud for you to have a really good experience. And what you should rather be doing is tackling those reflections within the room so that the sound system can be at an appropriate level, and you're hearing more of the direct sound coming from the speakers rather than the reflected sound, which is just making it really hard to listen. And so this is where we would use sound absorption. And this can be done in so many different ways. I mean, in our experience center, we've got these acoustic curtains in here.
Yeah.
It's one way of doing it. We wanted the look that this gives us, that sort of high-end theater look. But then in a venue, you might not want that. Maybe you want to put your corporate colors on acoustic panels, and you want to strategically position those in the band at where our ears are at. So, that's the most important band to area in which to position those panels. And the goal of that is to change the medium of the sound. So the HF, the high frequencies in particular, that's where your biggest problem comes with reflections. And you want that to hit the absorbative material inside of the acoustic panel, and then it will hit the wall behind it, and then it will reflect back through the acoustic panel. And every single time that it moves back through that medium, your energy is lost, which helps us to minimize that reverb in the room. But again, it really depends on your application, because sometimes you don't only want absorption. So for example, theaters want to have a lot of absorption, and cinemas, because you want to only hear the direct sound coming from the speaker so that you can localize where things are moving around the room.
Correct.
But if you put an orchestra inside of a cinema with really damped acoustics, they're going to have a horrible experience because they rely on that reverberation that naturally happens. But again, if you put them into a room that just has hard surfaces, it's still not going to be a good experience. And this is where we would use the acoustic principle called diffusion.
Yeah.
So we actually want to then take the sound that's coming directly from the speaker. It'll hit your back wall as an example, but instead of coming back as one hard reflection, it scatters that sound at much smaller levels throughout the entire space, so you still get that wow orchestra feel. And so again, it's a combination of the two, and all different venues need different things.
Now you're talking my language.
Yeah, studio guy. Yeah.
So just layman terms, like simplified, what is the difference between point source and line array? And also explain what that looks like.
Yeah.
I know people would lean more towards line array because it looks impressive.
Yeah.
So tell us the difference on a technical aspect as well as a physical aspect.
Yeah, we work really closely with a lot of our customers, and we always try and educate where we can. And I think there's always been this misconception that line array must be better, and I think that is completely wrong. Again, it's always application based. I use the analogy often. It's like saying, well, a Ferrari must be best, but then you find out you're going off-roading. Is that Ferrari still the best? And again, the same thing can be applied with audio. There's the whole reason that if line array was better, then why would we have point source?
Yes.
So maybe let me talk about a little bit of the concept. So point source just refers to all sound coming from one speaker in one place.
Okay.
And so these would be typical traditional, let's take a 12-inch speaker as an example. You've got your 12-inch LF driver, and if you've got your flare and your compression driver sitting inside of that enclosure, that would be considered a point source box, because everything is coming from that one box. Again, there's a lot of pros to this. So in smaller venues, what that offers you is it offers you incredible coverage. So you can often get 90 degrees, or with our CDD, our constant differential dispersion technology, you can get 110 degrees of horizontal coverage without any HF drop-off. And that is sometimes what you need, because you're not trying to achieve high SPL in that venue. You're trying to optimize coverage in that space. And so a point source would be perfect for that. Line array, and sorry, I always use the analogy, it sounds so silly, but let me do it because I'm trying to maybe educate some people who might not be familiar with these concepts. But with like a hose pipe, that sounds silly. But when you open that hose pipe onto a wide opening and you're wanting to spray water, then you'll see that that's what a point source does. It sprays water very wide, but don't try and shoot that water really far. And the line array is the complete opposite approach. You have a very narrow band. I mean, as an example, a point source speaker typically would have 60 degrees of vertical dispersion, and a line array box would typically have 10 degrees of vertical dispersion. So it's taking more of that sort of shotgun approach. And what the reasoning for this is like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's that we're wanting to be able to very fire audio into the areas in which it's required. And that's why they have such narrow dispersion properties. But then there's one thing that I think I must also throw in here, which is also important, is if you were to do that, and it is a small venue, it becomes very expensive, because you would need, as an example, 6 line array boxes to give you the same vertical dispersion that you would get from a point source box. So that's not always appropriate, and just throws you out of budget. Meanwhile, you're not going to be running that sound system at that level So it's kind of going to be a bit wasted. And then you get venues which fall in between the two spaces that I've spoken about. You'll get something that is, point source is really good up to sort of 15 meters. Anything further than 15 meters, you need to be looking at another alternative. And this is where constant curvature comes into play. So constant curvature takes the best of both of those worlds and puts it into something that falls into the middle, where you're looking for higher SPL than a point source box, but you're looking for more coverage than a line array box. You can go with something called constant curvature, where, as an example, our Taurus range of speakers has multiple compression drivers inside of the same box. So you're really getting a lot more HF. And you can really position it to where you want it to be. So it doesn't have as much control as a full wavefront precision line array, but it has higher SPL than a typical point source box.
What trends are you currently, seeing in the live space and, in the foreseeable future?
Yeah. So again, this is something where I think there's a lot more growth happening here. We're at the point where sound systems are really good now. The optimization of these sound systems are really good now. And so they're trying, I think the industry is just trying to be more creative as to how to deploy these sound systems. And so what we're trying to see is another partner of Martin Audio, well, actually is owned by Martin Audio, but it's a company called Timax. And Timax specializes in immersive audio. And we're actually seeing this now filter across into the live sound industry. This is typically happens more internationally because budgets are a lot more friendly, and you can put the appropriate amount of speakers really easily, whereas in South Africa I think we need to be a little bit more cost effective. But I am starting to see that people are placing more importance on the audio quality. There's always been a focus on visuals because I think by nature humans pay a lot of attention to what they see, visuals, quality images. The first thing they'll do is go out and buy a really high-end TV. And I think people are starting to realize how important good quality audio is now too.
Absolutely.
And the biggest problem that we've had it's not a problem, but one of the downsides of live music events is that we've needed to run them in mono, simply because depending on where you're standing, you're not going to get the full imaging of what's happening on stage. So, in a smaller venue or in a studio, you would want stuff on the left speaker and you'd want certain things on the right speaker, and you'd get a phantom center. But that only works when you're sitting in that key position,
Exactly.
that equalateral triangle point, if from a studio point
Absolutely,
of view. But now what we're able to do is, instead of hanging a left line array hang at a festival and a right line array hang, we're now able to hang multiple line array hangs across the entire stage front. And what that allows us to then do is that it allows us to be very creative in terms of where we position stuff on an object basis. So unlike normal typical stereo where we're relying on phantom centers based on panning, here we're able to actually put key instruments and certain things on actual object as an object base onto certain speakers, where the speakers will now mimic that position. So if you're standing in the audience, you can still hear some of the PA that's on the right.
That's brilliant.
And you can even get creative with different stereo imaging between pairs of speakers. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it, but that's definitely where I'm seeing a trend that is possibly going to move more into South Africa.
That's brilliant. Soon, That's brilliant. So for a sound engineer coming up, what advice would you give for them to focus on initially to get themselves on the road? I mean, for me personally, the first thing that was amazing with studio production was to be exposed to other engineers that have had experience.
Yes.
But I mean, it's the advice that they can give. I've wasted so much money buying the wrong gear.
Yes.
And they've guided me down the road as to what to get, how to implement it, how to train your ear. So what advice would you give live sound engineers?
I've got a bit of a spin on this one.
Sure.
I personally believe in our industry. It's such a small industry. I know you think South Africa's big, but everybody knows everybody somewhere. And my biggest advice for upcoming engineers or people who want to become engineers would be absolutely networking and relationships. Align yourself with a company that you believe in, a company that you like what they're doing. Find a way of positioning yourself into a company like that, even if it's on a freelance sort of basis, or even if it's on a what's the word I'm looking for? Volunteer basis. There we go. Just to get yourself exposed. And then that is probably the best advice I can give you, because a lot of the time everybody thinks you study stuff. and then now I'm entitled to that job.
Absolutely not.
Because I have a qualification. And to be honest, qualifications are good because it gives you exposure to what you're needing to learn, but experience is everything. And it's difficult to just be accepted into a job with no experience. So for me, I think studying is good, but experience is better. And how you get experience is exposure. And so align yourself with people that you like actually can be mentored by and grow with.
Yeah. And, going through experience, you do face challenges. So my next question is, if I may, tell us one of your most challenging moments as a live sound engineer or as a guy setting up a system and it's just not gelling. What was one of those memorable moments of you just,
this is a good one,
knocking your head against the speaker?
And I'm happy to be vulnerable to them. And I think all of us have a bit of a story. And, one of the ones for me was many years ago, back when I was still studying the diploma in sound engineering. I had a lecturer there that I grew really fond of, and for some reason he had a lot of faith in me. And I think it was one afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock that afternoon, he said to me, like, John, how's your knowledge on an M7? I said, well, pretty good. Wow, what's up? So he says, well, tomorrow you're mixing monitor land for Park Life Acoustics. And I was like, seriously? He's like, yeah, you better go home and do all your channel lists because these are the bands and artists that you're going to be mixing monitors for. And leading into your next question, which was bashing your head, this is where you really get exposed to what happens on the ground. You can have your channel lists prepped, you can understand the console, you can think that you've got a good ear for getting a good mix, but there's a few dynamics when you're doing monitors. And I'll give you some of the insight into this particular show. At that time was typically more comfortable with mixing front of house, just looking after the audience. The band doesn't really know what they sound like, but you feel you're getting a good result in the audience area. Monitors is completely different. The audience, you're not mixing for the audience at all, but you need to make sure that the artists are comfortable. And so their levels are right. They're actually more important in my opinion, because if your artists aren't feeling comfortable, then they're not going to perform the way that they would like to perform. And so the result for the whole show won't be as good. So it's a lot of pressure. And it's also, there's fast changeovers. So you have to be able to move quite quickly when it comes to bands transitioning. But the challenge that we faced on this particular event was, this was on one of the second stages that at this particular event. And it was very close to a lightning pole. And the stage was running off of a generator. And anybody who understands a lot about how RF works and interference, we found ourselves with the bands jamming on stage in their in-ears to some old 70s radio station. And it was funny for the first 5 minutes while we couldn't believe what they were saying until we actually listened to it. And we realized that we were getting a lot of interference, which was getting passed on through the console into their in-ears. And so we actually then had to scramble to put isolating transformers into the system so that we were able to minimize that and reduce it so that we can carry on with the show. And again, all of this happens while everybody is just waiting for bands to go live. So that was probably one of the most challenging times, but we managed to pull it off. So.
Sure. So, when I started, and this is not even close to live, but when I started producing music, I was very technical. I focused on high frequencies, low frequencies, mid-range, mic positioning, speaker positioning with the amplifiers, getting the microphones to have the perfect phase, especially when you're recording drums, because you have 12 different microphones, so you don't want them to. So it was so technical that I missed the emotional aspect of the music. How do you balance that? How do you balance the technical with actually giving someone that emotional experience that they look for when they go to live concerts?
Maybe if I can change the question slightly. I just think that this is a really good point, because a lot of the time when you go to these events, you might be working at the events or you might be responsible for some of the gear at these events. And so you're only there purely from sort of a technical point of view. And you're always like wondering, you have to be on your toes. You got to be ready to assist where you need to assist. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me, to be able to enjoy live music and concerts and actual music the way that I always used to. And so for me, sometimes I just make the time to to go and see an artist that I really enjoy, where there's no pressure, nobody knows who you are, what you do, and that there's no responsibility for you to be there. And I think that that is important, because the whole reason that we are doing this is because we love music. So I think to be able to balance it, that might be one of the ways. I don't know if that kind of answers things.
Absolutely. All right, so just random fun questions before we end the podcast.
Yeah.
There's a big range of Martin audio. What is your favorite?
I think you might have thought of, I was alluding to one particular model, which would be the WPC.
Okay.
I think if I had to choose a tonal quality of a box, the WPC would be my favorite. You know, all of the Martin Audio speakers have a certain signature to them, and that's just the tuning that they are targeting. And for me, the WPC is just one of those ones where it's just what I like. I just feel that the clarity's there, I feel the mids are there, and I feel that the low frequencies are there. And it always just surprises me what that box is able to do. You know, it really does perform like a box that is much physically larger, simply because everything is so compact inside of it. And this is a great box for me, because it's big enough to be really good outdoor, but it's also small and aesthetically pleasing enough to be used indoor, where aesthetics are important. And so I really like that. But if I have to also choose a second speaker, it would definitely be the CDD, the one with the coax design. That's something special, especially if you are really into that vocal clarity. There's just something about that speaker that is so sweet.
And okay, so people have heard about the Martin range more on the high end, correct?
Yes.
Is there something on the mid range, lower end that people could check out?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is again a strong point for Martin Audio. They are one of the big great ones. I don't want to sit and label other brands that they sit in tier with, but for me, Martin is unique in the sense that they've actually extended their range into an area which some of the other competing brands aren't doing. So they've got the Blackline range, the XPs at the moment. So that's their powered version, which are phenomenal speakers in terms of price versus performance and quality. You know, they're great because they have full DSP on the back with digital screens that you can actually turn them on their sides, switch them into a monitor mode. If you want to use them for monitors, you can easily switch them between full frequency or crossed over with a subwoofer. You can choose which top it is with the subwoofer. That's a really great active range to look at, because there's not many brands that play up there that are bringing their, how can I say, their quality into a slightly lower price point.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is that they've also got the Blackline Q range now. So Blackline X was the passive version, which has actually recently just been replaced by Blackline Q, which we have here in our experience center. And that's a really nice range, because I always joke with like Formula One technology that filters down into cars, and military technology that filters down into communications and stuff. And likewise, there's a lot of more premium speakers in the Martin Audio range where that technology is filtering down into that more entry level
That's
range.
amazing.
So you can get exposed to the quality of the more premium range, but at a more accessible price for some individuals. And so as an example, on the Blackline Q8, you'll see it's quite a tall speaker. And it's because they're using differential dispersion technology in the flare itself. So, you know, they're now trying to make a little bit of a mix of what I was talking about earlier, where that flare is being tapered in two different ways, where the bottom taper has wide taper, so you can get really good coverage close to the speaker. And then the top part of that flare is a more closed off taper, so that you get better throw over the distance from front to back of the venue, minimizing that natural drop off.
So that's a combination of point source and line array.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a bit of a combination of the two. And I think that this is where we're starting to see this technology and modeling actually come to light a little. But yes, definitely check out the Blackline Q range, check out the Blackline XP range. And I think whoever does do that will be pretty surprised at the price points of these speakers when you consider the brands that they compete with.
That's brilliant. Random question. And I know we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, you going to your first experience, checking Evanescence. But what was your favorite band seeing live, like throughout your life?
Yes.
Favorite band?
My favorite band that I saw live would have to be Linkin Park. Yeah, I was at that concert, man. And
That was at the FME Stadium?
That was at FME
I was there, bro.
Yeah,
I was there.
Fantastic. We missed each other.
2013.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, 2013.
Yeah, we missed each other.
Yeah.
But that was a really special experience because at the time I had quite a good friendship with the 5FM team.
Yeah.
And was able to access some tickets, but not just normal tickets. We actually had tickets to the booth.
Yeah.
So we were able to go to a private booth where artists were coming in and out. And, you know, you had an opportunity to really network with these guys and just see how down to earth they are. At the end of the day, everybody's just doing what they love, man.
Yeah.
And then after that, halfway through, we all just made the decision, the box is cool and all, but we love audio. Let's all head down to Golden Circle and actually just get a chance to experience that band live.
Yeah.
And that was a really good experience. You know.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining Mic'd Up with Audiosure. Appreciate your knowledge, appreciate your time, and hope we can do this again.
100%.